So the thing about motion tracking or camera tracking or whatever your grandma calls it in Blender is that it's very complicated, right? You need to know about actual tracking and solving, and you need to know about yourself, and you could fall into this trap of watching a bunch of tutorials and never actually starting your own project because there's a lot to learn. This tutorial is meant to teach you all of camera tracking, everything you basically need to know to get a monkey to be on a plane, okay? That's why we're here. You're just here to get your monkey on the plane, and then everything else you can figure out yourself, right? Because you could learn about offset tracking, you can learn about what else is bullshit, normalization, we don't care. Monkey on plane, that's why we're here. So let's get started immediately. I have this piece of footage that I recorded, by the way, available on Patreon, but of course you could record something yourself. I have this piece of footage that I filmed. It's me walking with the camera. I want to figure out what that camera motion is. I'm basically walking down the street towards the FedEx thing. By the way, I don't know if you know this, FedEx has a hidden arrow inside of their EX. Can't unsee that anymore. I have some footage. Main things you need to do if you want to film your own, make sure your shutter speed's something insane. Mine's like 1/200. If you can go crazier, go crazier. You don't want motion blur. Second of all, I closed my aperture so that there's no depth of field. And third of all, I made sure the camera wasn't moving all the way around, right? It's a bit chaotic, but you know, you can follow it with your eyes. I'm not shaking it crazy because that makes it harder for you. So when you film, make sure you satisfy those requirements or just download my thing off Patreon. Okay, we have footage. How do we track it? Well, first thing we do is we need to go to the tracking panel in Blender. So I'm on Blender 2.92, I believe. Use whatever version of Blender you want. I don't care. Recently, there's been a update, a patch for like the speed of tracking. So preferably get a newer one. I don't care. Go here, go to Movie Clip Editor. We're now in the Movie Clip Editor. This is where you import in movie clips, where you track them, where you do masks, all this. What you can do is you can either click open and then like pick your piece of footage, or even easier, take your footage, click it, drag it, it's in there, beautiful. And again, I just want to re-emphasize, this is meant to be from beginning to end. You never have to touch tracking before. So if I go over some obvious stuff, my bad. When you import in your footage, you're going to have all this information on the right. You have the resolution. In this case, it's 1080p footage. It also knows that it's 29.97 frames per second. Basically, a lot of useful information. First thing I want to do is I want you to make sure that your project settings, I guess it's in the output tab, are matching this. So is this 1920 by 1080? Yes. So if it isn't, make sure it matches if you have a different resolution. Frame rate, is it matching? No. We need to make sure it's 29.97. Cool. Also, render tab, color management, just set this to standard. It's just a thing. Don't worry too much about it. It just makes it so that the colors are the same as when we filmed it, okay? These are the 3 things you need to do before we begin tracking, okay? Okay, cool. So now we have our movie clip inside here. You see we can play it. It's being loaded into memory. This is what this purple thing is. However, since this is only 194 frames, as it says right here, you can see we run out of footage, right? So, you know, it plays it and then we run out. So we want to make sure our project endpoint is set to 194. You can either do that or you can hit set scene frames and it does it for you. So it automatically detects what the last frame is, and you can see automatically 1 through 194, okay? Other thing, if you have not loaded this footage into memory, like you haven't played through it and this whole thing is purple, just hit this prefetch button. We actually have already loaded this into memory, so but that's what prefetch does, okay? Cool, let's save this as a mega Patreon, because it's Patreon, tracking tutorial. Okay, we have officially done everything we need to actually begin the process. We've imported in the footage, we've matched the stuff on the right, we've matched this project endpoint. Okay, we're ready. The way camera tracking works, and this is just like high level theory, like doesn't matter. The way camera tracking works is we take a bunch of objects or a bunch of features in our shot, we say where are these moving, and then once we know where a bunch of pieces in our footage are moving, like where is this X moving, where is this fire hydrant, what am I trying to say? Once you know where a lot of stuff is moving, you can then reverse engineer where the camera's moving. So tracking of the camera is done by tracking stuff in the scene, okay? How do we add in a tracker? Easiest way is you click add, and that is going to add in a tracker. I wouldn't recommend doing this. Instead, just hit control click. So you hold control and then you click, and this lets you actually add in a marker where you want it to be. So for example, I'm looking for something in my scene that has a lot of detail that I could follow it with my own eye. So for example, the corner of this X, control, click, you've added a tracker, okay? Once you do this, we actually get a track panel. This shows us kind of like a enhanced view of what is inside what is called the pattern area. This is the pattern we're going to be following frame by frame. And if you go to this menu and enable search, by the way, shortcut for this is Alt-S, since you will be using this all the time, Alt-S. This is going to be your search window. So again, pattern area is what we are tracking, just the corner of this X, and search area is where we are going to be looking for it frame by frame by frame. So, for example, if we were to go into our track, and you want to make sure this is big enough so that if the pattern moves over here next frame, it's within these bounds. So if we go to the track panel, whatever you want to call it, and we track 1 frame forwards, yes, track selected markers. You track 1 frame forwards. You can see now it is following our feature. By the way, if you want to lock this to the center of the view, hit L for lock. You can hit this button as well. And you can see we are tracking frame by frame by frame, and it's leaving this motion trail. Now again, the reason that this tracker is working so successfully is I've picked a good pattern area, something that's easy to track, like there's orange and then a high contrast difference between orange and white, whatever. We have that, and also our search area is big enough. So you can just go frame by frame by frame by frame by frame, or you can hit the button next to it to track all the way forwards. And you can see it made it all the way forwards, although I don't know why it isn't set scene frame to 194. I must have undid that. But you can see this tracker, now that we play all of it, it follows this. If it doesn't, we need to go back and do some correction. In this case, we don't. So when we're happy with the tracker, we don't want to modify anything anymore. What you're going to do is you're going to have the tracker selected. So if you don't, select the tracker, hit lock. Shortcut for that is Control L. And now this tracker is locked. We're not changing it. The data exists. Okay, cool. That's how easy it is to add in a tracker, okay? A general rule of thumb, if you want to get a camera track, you want to have at least 8 of these at all times. So we already did 1 of them. Super easy. Okay, let's do another, and we'll talk about some of this stuff in a second. We'll keep it simple for now. So I'm looking for some piece of any kind of feature in our shot that hopefully lasts throughout the whole thing. So for example, this little thing over here, I don't know what it is, something for the fire department, I'm sure. I'm not going to track it because you can see as we play the footage, it goes off frame, right? So ideally you pick something that's there the whole time. So I'm going to try this. I don't know what it is. It's just a piece of something on the ground. Again, hold Control, click. We've added in a tracker. Our pattern area has this thing, and our search area now is plenty big enough. So let's just track, going frame by frame by frame. Seems good. Now that we're happy with it, let's track all the way forwards. Okay. You can see it tracked to frame 121. So this is what will happen sometimes. It does a successful track. And then it's, it starts, self-doubting itself. It has low self-confidence. And your goal here, as the guy using Blender or girl, you got to pat Blender on the back and say, I know you're not confident. It's fine. Keep going. Okay. So what's happening here is that between these 2 frames, it feels like it's lost the pattern, even though it hasn't. It's like been perfectly fine up till this point. Okay. Again, what's happening here is we put in a tracker. It now has this image, and it's going to try to track this image frame by frame by frame, or this pattern, whatever you want to call it. So on this frame, I guess it changed enough, so whatever. To fix this, what you're going to do is we are just going to scale down this tracker, or you can move it. I wouldn't recommend moving it. You want it to stay in the same spot. Just scale it or rotate it, do anything to it, because what that's going to do is it's going to add in a new reference point. So from now on, when we're tracking forwards, it's going to be tracking frame 120, and then forward. So this is the new image it's going to be matching over and over and over again. So we've kind of overridden the first one, okay? So, scale it, do whatever, and now let's keep tracking. And you can see now it's successfully continuing to track. Let's make it all the way to the end, and you can see now it's made it all the way to the end. So again, what happened here is we had the first frame. That's the pattern. It tracked it. It tried to match it frame by frame by frame. But then as we got closer and closer to this, I walked towards it, it looked different enough that we needed a new reference point that now that would be what is being matched. Okay, cool. You keep doing this. Here's some settings to make our lives easier. So these settings are what is going to be applied when we add in a new tracker. So any tracker we do is going to inherit these settings. If I was to make this a pattern area 60, you can see it comes in with a larger pattern area. All the settings we do here transfer over. Here are some settings to make your life, one person's watching this, easier. Enable normalize. So any tracker we add is going to have the normalize feature. What is normalize? Well, I could tell you. Basically what it means is that lighting variation. So if a little shadow comes over the area you're tracking, or it's not as bright one frame to another, it's going to try to ignore that. The real definition is normalize light intensities while tracking slower. So we're making tracking a bit slower in exchange for it being more invariant to changing lighting condition, which is a good thing, okay? More tracking settings. You can pick your correlation number. This is basically a percent confidence. So basically, every single frame, as it moves pattern to pattern to pattern, it needs to be 75 in this case percent sure that it has a match. Otherwise, it's going to stop tracking like that other one did before on frame 121. If you set this to something like 0.999, so it has to be very confident, it's only going to keep tracking if it's 100% sure it's a match. If you want it to be kind of fast and loose, bring it closer to 0, okay? Other than this, we have motion models. Do we want to track only the changing location of the pattern, or do we have perspective, rotation, whatever going on? Let's keep this as is, okay? So let's pick another feature. So make sure, again, you're on frame 1. So if you're on another frame, just go back to frame 1. And just so that we're starting from the beginning and we can track the whole thing, I've control-click to add in a tracker. Let's go frame by frame by frame by frame. Seems fine. And then let's track forwards. I made it all the way to the end. Perfect. Sometimes a track that won't make it all the way to the end will if we change the motion model. Just a thing. Okay, we have 3 trackers. Let's do one that probably won't survive the entire shot because it's going to go off frame. Again, I'm just picking things that are high contrast, so I wouldn't want like this to be a tracker. It's just like a random patch of ground, but something that has a dot is perfect. So let's go frame by frame by frame. Seems fine. Track forwards. Cool. So I made it 33 frames. Why? Because on the next one, it's starting to go off frame. Now, it looks like we could get an extra frame of information, so let's go 1 frame forwards where it's lost it. We're going to hit G for move and Blender, G to manually move it, and you can see we've like manually extended this by 1 frame. But you want to make sure that we're picking the same area of the dots, so I think we want to move this a bit here, just so it matches, and then Control L to lock the tracker. So even though this tracker doesn't live for the entire time, it's going to be useful information for that part of the shot. Again, ideally, you want them to live throughout the whole thing. So let's do another Control-click, and soon we'll start speeding through this. Control-T. Oh, by the way, why did I hit Control-T? That's the shortcut for track forwards. So you can see here, it's lost it, so let's go a frame back, add a new reference point, Control-T, Control-L to lock. We have another tracker. Now we're starting to speed up. Let's try a weird one. I don't know if this will work, but let's try the corner of this window. It doesn't need to just be dots on the street, right? Although you do want some dots on the street since we want to know where the floor is in 3D space, but we'll get to that. Another tracker here. Let's try tracking it forwards. Control-T. Nope. So this is why the 75% confidence thing is important. So you can see at some point it must have hopped and was confident enough that that was a match. Yeah, so if we set the correlation to something like 0.9, that doesn't happen. However, since it does seem to like that area, let's see if we can track it. So let's go frame by frame by frame. Oh, it was just about to be off screen. Perfect. Let's track forwards. So this one had a bit of a hiccup. By the way, if you want to see where the hiccup is without like visually going frame by frame by frame, you can totally go to this graph information, which shows the X, Y locations of each tracker, and you can see like where it's starting to go off. Like here, there's some like bouncing variation we don't want. So I'm just going to delete this tracker and try a different one. But that's the thing about tracking. It's a lot of trial and error, and I haven't tracked this shot before since I wanted it to be a clean take or a fresh perspective on how you would track it yourself. Let's try doing a distant thing instead. Again, if it doesn't work, we can just go back to tracking stuff on the ground. It's not too important. So let's go frame by frame by frame, L to center it. Seems to be tracking fine. Yep, there we go. By the way, just some general theory. I'm trying to keep it light on you. When you pick your 8 or more trackers, you want them to be varying in location. So have some of them be in the foreground. So for example, this tracker is really close to the camera. The cone one's super far away. So have some variation in 3D space in terms of depth. Have some variation in 2D space, like we have a lot of trackers in the middle, one on the left. It'd be cool if we had a tracker on the right. Just put in trackers in different areas. It's good for the reverse engineering of the camera motion. But for now, let's keep going. I'm thinking I want to track this patch of ground for however long it lasts. And because this is kind of like more of a perspective track, like it's on a planar surface, and as we go closer to it, there's some deformation. For this one, I'm going to change the type of track. So instead of location, I'm going to either use perspective or affine. Affine is basically like a shortcut cheat of perspective. It calculates faster, but is almost the same. So I'm going to add in an Affine Tracker, make it a bit bigger. So what I want you to think of when you see this is we are tracking that patch of ground in terms of shearing and perspective and all this. Let's see if that works. So frame by frame by frame seems to be fine. Track forwards. Cool. So I made it this many frames because then it goes off frame fine. But you can see that unlike the other trackers that just have this pattern area that move and try to follow it, the Affine Tracker, if you look at the pattern area, it actually shifts in perspective, like it's changing shape just to match it. And if you look at the track window, you can see it almost looks like it stabilizes that area. So that's what Affine's useful for. So we'll go to the last frame, Control L to lock it, since we can't get any more information out of that. And let's keep going. So a couple more trackers until I think we're going to be good to go. Of course, we don't know for sure. Let's see if we can track this red thing. You know, there's only one like it, so there's no way Blender's going to be confused. Control T seems to be doing pretty good. I'm going to go a couple frames back since there's a bit of jitter. Scale this up. So now this is the new reference point. Control T. Now I've overridden the track, and let's see what this looks like. And this is a good area to look at it to see if there's a lot of flickering. Yes. So you can see at this point it starts to get a bit unstable. So what we can try is we could manually correct it, or you could try a different kind of tracker. So again, Affine is pretty good for these kinds of things. So I'm just going to try tracking it like this. And you can see now it's tracked all the way. Let's see if it looks a bit more stable from this tracking window. Let's stabilize that. Yeah. So you can see different motion models, useful for different things. So that's actually a great example. Okay, we have another tracker. So far throughout the whole shot, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 trackers that live throughout the whole thing. Let's see if we can swing a few more and then go for the solve, which is where we actually use this information. I'm thinking let's try to get more background information. Why not? It is useful. So I'm going to track this like church thing all the way in the background. Yes, there's a bit of parallax and all this, but because it's so far away, a location tracker is a fine approximation. There we go. That tracked super fast. What else can we do? I kind of like the look of that sign, although there does seem to be quite a lack of resolution there, but we'll see if we can swing it. Control T. Let's preview this tracker. And a lot of times what you'll do is you'll make a lot of trackers and you're going to end up throwing some away. That's just the process, but this seems fine. So technically we have 8. Let's see if we can get a few more before we continue. I feel like there's a good feature up here, this white dot. Let's see if Blender can track that. It might not be able to. Okay, so I made it this many frames. Let's update our reference point, make the search area bigger. Yep, it seems to be following. Okay, until we get to this frame. Again, you can either use this window, or you could use the shortcut Control T to track forwards, or Alt right arrow to track frame by frame forwards. So let's see if that works. Yep, some trackers need a lot of manual supervision, and that's just what it is. But this seems to be going pretty okay. We can do some manual updating. If it gives us too much trouble, we'll just abandon the tracker. Yep, this is giving us quite a bit of trouble. I'll give it a couple more frames before we abandon it. But sometimes, you know, it starts working for a while again. So yeah, I'm just updating this every frame that it's messing up, sometimes doing a manual adjustment. But if a tracker is giving you this much error, there's a good chance, not necessarily. By the way, if you want to clear this next frame that has incorrect information, you can just hit this button to clear everything past frame 146. What was I saying? Yeah, sometimes if a tracker is giving you this much trouble, there's a good chance that it's maybe not a great tracker to use. But from my experience, this one does seem like pretty solid. So that's why I'm pulling through for it. Okay, it seemed pretty good, although we did have a glitch earlier. You know what? I'm so close to abandoning this tracker. Let's just keep going with it for a bit. So once you've locked it and you want to update it again, unlock the tracker. That makes it, you know, we can overwrite the data again. And we're just going to fix this, making sure that it stays on. Okay, now we seem to be good. So let's watch this tracker, make sure it stays on. Yes. Oh, nope. There are a couple of whatever. I'm making a call. We're abandoning this tracker. Oh well. Okay, so I think we do have 8 trackers throughout the shot. It appears so. We will find out soon if these are enough. If not, we will need to add more trackers. But we have now maybe finished the tracking process. So once you've done this, go from the track panel to the, you guessed it, Solve panel, yay! This is where we use all this tracking information to try to reverse engineer a camera solve. Again, we might get an error, because I don't know, we haven't solved it yet. We might get an error, and if that happens, we'll just need to add in more trackers. So, solve panel, what do we need to do before we hit solve camera motion? First thing you need to ask yourself, was this filmed on a tripod? In this case, no. Basically what that means is it put on a tripod and you're just pivoting it around, like it's what's called a nodal pan because it's on a node. In this case, no, we're free moving. So make sure that's disabled. Second thing, do you want to enable this automatic keyframe where it's going to pick keyframe A and B for you? Well, before you choose, you might want to know what A and B are. Basically, these are two frames, any numbers between 1 and 194 in this case, so a pair of two keyframes A and B. These are two frames where it's going to do the most amount of work in between these two frames is the way you want to think about it. So it's going to do all the calculations here. And after it does that, it's going to extrapolate that. Okay, so we're not doing... Okay, the best way to describe this is these two frames basically are where the camera solve happens, the main math, and then everything gets propagated out. So if we pick two very good numbers, we want to do this ourselves. If we are not sure, we want to enable this automatically to pick for us. How do we know what are good sets of keyframes A and B? Well, that takes a bit of experience, but long story short, you want to pick two frames that have a good difference in parallax. So here are like our 8 trackers. We go down here. In reference to each other, they look very different. Don't worry about it too much. For now, we're going to have it automatically pick for us. Let's see what this gives us so far. So I'm hitting solve camera motion. It might give us an error. It might give, yep, it's giving us nan pixels, which means it's not working. We need to add in more tracking information. Or we could try to manually put in these keyframes, which I might try to do. But for now, let's try to add in another tracker. So I'm thinking let's add in some information on the right side here, since it seems to be very lacking. We could do, we'll see if this works. It might be a bit tricky, but I'm thinking let's try to do an affine track. So again, it's kind of like pseudo perspective on this patch of bricks. Let's see what that gives us. Control T, make sure it's locked on. So let's see, does that look good? So it's doing its stretching because we're getting further and closer, but it does seem to be staying on the same part of the brick. So I'm gonna call it good, let's lock it. Again, once you do this, you can totally solve again. So I'm gonna enable keyframe. Let's see if this one works. Okay, so this one actually gives us a camera solve, a very bad one. So once it gives you a camera solve, you will see a solve error of some number of pixels. You wanna keep this anywhere near 1 or below. So 5 is horrible, but it does give you a solve. And what this means is this is the average amount of drift in pixels that you're gonna get per frame. So you want that to be under a pixel if possible. So the name of the game is minimizing this number. So we could either do that by adding in more trackers, changing settings, whatever. But before we add in more trackers, let me try something. So we've picked our keyframe A and B, 1 and 134. So I'm just going to disable it so it keeps this. So if we resolve, nothing changes. 5.13. We could do it a million times, should stay the same. What I'm going to do is with these keyframes A and B now selected is I'm going to enable focal length. So this is going to make Blender guess how zoomed in I was during the shot. If you know this, perfect. Go to camera, go to lens, type in your focal length. I don't know what I filmed with, so I'm going to have it calculate. We're going to solve again. And you can see that with the very same numbers, we just enabled focal length. So now it's guessing it's 34. We've dropped our error from 5.3 to 0.88. So from something totally unacceptable to something that's actually pretty okay. Again, 1 and below is a good thing. Again, there's more theory here, but I'm trying to make it one tutorial. So enable this. It really does a good job. If you know this number, perfect. You can get an accurate number. Also, if you know your sensor width, like camera information, put it in. But some people are filming with phones, some people are whatever, so I'm just going to assume that you don't know this information. Okay? Cool. So now we have a solve error of 0.88. We can drop it even further by adding in more reliable trackers. We can look at this like tracking information and be like, oh, which of these are good and bad? But the fact that all of these trackers, this X and Y information, are bundled together, it almost looks like they're all like overlapping on the same thing. That's a great sign, okay? And then this blue line is basically showing our camera error, and that seems to be staying close to 0. So there's a bit of variation at the very end, but it's looking pretty good. So we could add in more trackers to lower our error. Another thing you can do, super easy, go to this, enable info. So now every single tracker we select is going to have this text under it. And again, what this number means is it's a bit of math, but it's going to be our average drift, average error per frame. That is made up of all these individual tracker errors. So you can see this tracker has an error of 1.2. This tracker has an error of 0.93. It's a bit hard to read. This tracker has an error of 0.71, and all these numbers average to 0.88. What this means is we can try to find the highest error tracker and make it less contributive to the solve. So it's going to contribute less of its error. So if I'm looking at all of these, I'm looking for the number that is the largest relative to 0.88. And I'm seeing that this brick tracker that we added in has an error of 1.79. That is awful. Okay, so I'm going to take this. I'm going to change its weight. In other words, its contribution, how strong it is for the track. And by the way, I don't think I mentioned this. All these settings on the left, like I said, this is what is going to be inherited by new trackers. All this stuff, or when we're in the tracking panel, so this is new tracker information. All the stuff on the right is it's for the individual tracker. So once you've already added it in, you can change stuff. So for example, if I lower this to 0.5 or whatever, you can see this tracker is still at 1. It doesn't inherit it to everything. What was I saying? I was saying this thing has a high error, so let's bring down the weight. In other words, its contribution. So I still want it to have some contribution. It shouldn't be 0. That's called a 0 weight tracker. They're useful. Not for this tutorial. I want it to be above 0 but less than 1. So let's take all this information. I'm going to keep the focal length as is, so I don't need to recalculate it. So again, once we add our keyframes A and B, I don't want to solve those again. Same for focal length. Let's try to resolve. And now we went from 0.88 to 0.69. Why? Because we took our highest error tracker and made it contribute less. Okay, cool. So I think we've done the camera solve. Now let's try to get it in Blender and put that fucking monkey on that fucking plane. Okay, we're on that part of the tutorial. So you can see in our 3D viewport, nothing's really going on. It's just a cube and the whatever. Whereas in the movie clip editor, we have these trackers and the camera solve. How do we get that information from here to here? And I will tell you after I fix my throat. You know, talking for a long time is actually kind of hard. It's like a muscle that you have to exercise. Anyways, how do we get the information from here to there? You don't want to hear about my throat problems. How do we do that? Well, once you've done your solve camera motion, so again, we're going to be in the solve panel. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to, I don't know why I can't find the button, but what you want to hit is set up tracking scene. So again, once you have a camera solve, you have some solve error that's hopefully less than 1. You hit set up tracking scene. You can see it adds in a plane, but also our camera is moving now. Cool. If we actually look at our thing, it did a couple things. Like it put in our footage as the background. Stuff's moving. It doesn't look good, right? It doesn't look like the plane's actually on the floor. It kind of looks like it's moving with it, but not perfectly. We'll fix that. But you can see in general, stuff's going pretty well. In fact, what we can also do is if you go to this overlay options and you enable motion tracking, I believe, it will show you these empties essentially. And what these do, I'm sure you can already guess. These correspond to different trackers. So you can see when I select one, it's going to select a different tracker. So these are our trackers in 3D space. Not very obvious like what they look like now, but we'll fix it. So again, we have this issue of alignment, right? We basically have this good solve, but like nothing's attaching to anything, and here's why. For example, I want you to look at these 4 trackers that are also being highlighted here, and maybe this one as well. These are examples of 4 to 5 trackers that are on the floor of what we filmed, right? These are the floor. Whereas when we look at it here, you can see they're just kind of in the abyss. So no wonder it doesn't look like the cube and the plane are on the floor. They should be up here. We could fix that by either moving stuff to those dots, or we could actually like adjust the camera and like do this whole thing. So I'm just kind of like lining it up. This is going to be a bit of a rough approximation. So I'm just kind of like lining it up so that they move. And now you can see it looks weird, but at least it is attached to the floor. So you can see there's a bit of theory there about orientation. But the cool thing is you don't actually have to do this yourself. There's actually a tool in Blender to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select 3 trackers that should be on the floor. And you can see we have this orientation panel with the floor option. You just select floor, and this will automatically put the camera in a place such that these 3 trackers are on the XY plane, as you can see. Okay, let's see what this looks like. It looks good, except the thing's massive, but you can see it's on the floor now. How do we make it look less big? Well, in essence, what we want to do is just move this camera away. So if this is like the 3D cursor, we just want to move it away, and that will, in effect, make this look smaller because it's further away. You know what I mean. Again, there's a tool for that. So I'm just going to select any 2 trackers that, again, we know where they are in 3D space. There are like these empties out here. We hit set scale, and you could pick the number. What this is going to do is it's going to say how many units should there be in between here and here. So if we pick a big number like 5, it's going to make everything look small because now there's a lot of space in between those two. And you can use this if you take an on-set measurement. You could take a measuring tape and you can figure out an exact 1-for-1 scale for this. I'm just going to pick something like 3 so that there's a good amount of space but nothing crazy. And again, what this does is it moves the camera away. So let's see. Looks good. Cool. We have the floor oriented. We have the scale picked. It still kind of looks wonky. So I'm just going to select a tracker where I want the center or the origin to be. So select a tracker, hit set origin. That's going to move the 3D cursor there, or the camera. Everything is the camera moving, but in effect, it looks like other stuff's moving. Okay, we've done that. We can also rotate the camera now. And there is tools for this. So you could pick like off the origin. You could pick this tracker. So again, if this is the origin, I know I'm not doing a good job of explaining this. If this is the origin, you can pick another tracker like this one to be the y-axis. So you can see this line that's being made between these two trackers, which you can totally see here, like this green line. That's the y-axis. You can also turn it into the x-axis, and I can see it's a red line. You could orient it like that. I recommend orienting it manually. So I'm just going to select my camera, make sure it's off the 3D cursor, rotate on the z-axis, and that just lets me make my y-axis parallel to this line on the sidewalk. Okay, cool. And I can actually just move my objects now in like 3D space to position them where I want them to be. And you can see we're pretty much good. So again, this whole step was about orientation. It was about, we can close the motion movie clip editor now. It was about putting our camera in the correct place, from the correct distance, with the correct focal length, all of these things. And you can see now we get a pretty reliable track. Even with Blender, free software, you can get good tracks. Cool. Now, how do we put a monkey on the floor and render it, okay? We've done the motion tracking. Let's get to it. So first of all, you're going to see that a whole bunch of stuff was added as well when we hit setup tracking scene. We have a foreground collection, a background collection, different view layers. It's confusing. If I hit F12 to render, let's see what happens. Okay, we render this, and then that's kind of it. Whereas in the compositing, there should be a lot more going on. Again, it adds a bunch of stuff. First thing I want you to do, just don't be overwhelmed. That's the first thing. Second thing I want you to do, go to the Render tab, go to Film, go to Transparent. This is going to fix the issue where the background was gray instead of, our actual footage. Now you can see it's fixed. If we go to another frame and render it, so now the cube's like in the bottom right of the frame, let's render it. You can see it matches, right? So it takes the correct frame from the footage, overlays it with the render layer. We're good, okay? What's actually going on here is if you go to compositing, is it's first taking in our movie clip, so that's just the footage without anything else. So again, this is our final render with the cube. It takes the footage, does some camera distortion stuff. Don't worry about it. We didn't talk about it. In fact, we could just get rid of those nodes. It takes this, it overlays this render layer. So now we've put one on top of the other with this alpha over, and then it does that again for the background, which is like, why do we even have a background? It does all that, and then it delivers a final render. What I recommend to keep this simple is take the background layer, delete it. We don't need it. I want everything in one view layer. Keep it simple. I'm also going to delete these foreground and background collections. It's just a whole lot of headache, okay? I just want everything in one thing, so now when we hit render, we essentially get the same result. In fact, we don't need this. We don't need this. This is as simple as it can be. We have footage. We have the render, the foreground layer, and it's putting one on top of the other. Again, we could rename this to like render. So this is what's being shown here. This is the footage. It's putting one on top of the other. And that matches for any frame. Because the footage, it takes a second, but it updates on every single frame. It's just that we need a render to match it. Okay? To make the monkey on our thing now, let's keep it simple. I'm going to go to Cycles. And let's see what this looks like. I'm going to, and it's, by the way, the plane that it makes should already be a shadow catcher, MC. Yeah, it's already a shadow catcher. If you don't have this, make a plane. It really, you could do all of this yourself. So just make a plane. We're going to put it over here. I'm going to go to Visibility, make it a shadow catcher, and instead of a cube, let's put a monkey, not a grid. Whoops, that was a mistake. I'm going to put a monkey in our shot. Although I feel like this is way too big. So let's go to the side view. Okay, we got a monkey. Putting it on the floor. Let's see what that looks like. In fact, let's make both these bigger. And by the way, any transformation we do to this, as long as your camera solve was good, will work. Okay? We have the monkey, we have the shadow catcher. If we hit render, it's going to take a bit longer than before. And it also seems to be glitching out the shadow catcher, but whatever. It's fine on render. You put the monkey into things. So at this point, you want to do like all the tricky stuff, like you want to match your lighting. So you want to make sure your shadow's coming from the same angle as the footage. So in this case, you can see the shadows a bit to the right and under. So I'm going to move my light to be there. You can pick your light stuff, whatever. Oh, it's because of this grid that it's glitching out. You could pick your light settings, like how soft should the light be. So for example, make it a big radius. That's a soft light. 1 of 0 is a very harsh shadow. Okay, at this point, the reason I'm stuttering is because I suck at this, but also we've kind of done the thing. So at this point, if you were to render out the entire clip, you will get a monkey that matches the thing. So I think my work here is officially done after 35 minutes. So there we go, guys. That is the one tutorial you need to watch to get your fucking monkey to be on the fucking plane. I know there was a lot to take in, but I tried to keep it simple. I didn't talk about offset. I didn't talk about lens distortion, nothing, okay? Simple. Maybe at some point I'll make a part 2 if you guys want a advanced, like what else should I be looking for? But there you go. You did the thing, and cool. What do you see on the right? Is it a list of times I stuttered during this tutorial? No. It's a list of very valuable, very dear to me patrons. Why are people on Patreon? Why are they supporting both the CG Matter and the Default Cube channel? Well, one, I don't know. But second of all, they get access to blend files like this one. So if you want to play around with this footage that I used and try to track it yourself, you can get that on Patreon. Also, any other blend, any other whatever I've ever uploaded, so months and even years at this point of content, you can get with a 1-month subscription on Patreon. They get that. They get early access to tutorials. They watch it even before you, sometimes multiple days early. Additionally, exclusive tutorials I do not post on either channel, so those are just kind of like more advanced tutorials only for the patrons. Patreon newsletter, Discord, all of this stuff exists over there. So if you are interested, there's a link in the description. Thank you. And yeah, you don't need it. You've already learned the information. But if you want to support the channel and get those benefits, that's where they are. So hopefully you learned something. I'm ready to move on to something else. So I'm out of here. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you had a great whatever day it is. Bye-bye. Yeah.